Now, after the excitement of the last couple of sessions, this might sound a little bit boring, but this is actually also an interesting series of events. Believe it or not, I actually spent the better part of a week and a half going over the little tidbits I'm about to summarize for you, but part of that is because of the fact that, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So, when the party got up in the morning, Rory mentioned what happened with the Gerlins and was adamant about the fact that they had to get the coins back. Araguna was actually rather hesitant about relinquishing his grip on the coins. However, with some convincing from Snarg, um, Araguna was able to give up the fairly large stockpile, had several thousand of the Gerlins. Thereafter, Coulson and Guido went to talk with the manager to reacquire the coins they'd spent during their stay here and that Araguna had spent on his room service. Now, Coulson was acting just a little bit off here. He was acting like a completely pompous, rich snob. For some strange reason, ever since he touched the coins. And so he goes up to the manager and says, "Yes, I'm sorry. He used the coins from the wrong bag." He was just perfect about it. He was just completely whatever, completely over the top. And it actually worked out really well, all things considered, because I decided that based on the way he was talking, he didn't even need to roll in order to convince the gentleman, in order to assist him in the matter. He was just, oh well, obviously, sir, we are terribly sorry about the inconvenience, blah blah blah. So I managed to get those coins back and replace them with with their own gold, which Guido helpfully handed over. Now, what happened next is the party split up a lot, and I had a bit of trouble keeping track of everything because of the way everyone was wanting to do everything at the same time. But long story short, some of the group headed out towards the local order post, because yes, there was an order post here, to get some food because all of the expensive fare here was ludicrously over the top and not very filling and cost several dozen gold per plate. Then they decided to go ahead and, oh, and by the way, at the order post they got grits, because that's what they had. Then they decided to go to the magic and trinket shop where Aragona had spent a couple coins the night previously. Meanwhile, Rory decided to go out and go hunting. And Coulson decided to head out, and he was like, "Okay, we shall head towards the order post, or towards the trinket shop." And he headed in completely the wrong direction, just kind of went over that way, and they were like, dude, Coulson?" This also started another kind of running gag. Snarg was, based on everything Snarg had seen recently, Snarg was starting to think that something was wrong with Coulson, and so he's like, "Coulson, you alright? Here, here." And he tried to start, having him drink some water, and that just kind of became a thing. Every time Snarg was concerned about someone, he'd be like, "Here, have some water, man." Um, so Coulson just kind of pompously heads off in a completely unknown direction, and after a while encounters a lovely Banderling woman who is like, "Oh, sir, please help me." And Coulson's like, "Yes, I will help you immediately." And the woman gives him this whole sob story about how there's this horrible person who's trying to do this horrible thing to her. It's all complete lies, but Coulson literally cannot roll against deception at this moment because of the way he's acting. At this point, he's really going over the top with it, treating Snarg as if he's his servant and all that sort of thing. And, Snarg again comes up and is like, "Here, have some more water." "Come on, Coulson, let's go!" And they manage to convince him to go back and deal with the situation. Meanwhile, um, back at the shop, Guido and Araguna have gotten there. I've talked to the manager in charge, and the manager's like, I'll have to put in a request. We've already sent in our payment for the week because this was a Friday when this happened. So, next Friday maybe I'll be able to get in. And Guido's like, "No, you don't understand. This is very urgent." "Why is it urgent?" "Oh, because they were an artifact of incredible importance." Now, the manager's response to this is basically, I yes, of course. I will definitely give you. I will get back to you. I'll talk to the managers, and they'll be back with you tomorrow. And then he leaves in quite a bit of a hurry. So they reconvene, and the party's like, "Okay, obviously this guy is not going to help us at all, and we probably just gave away too much information. We need to figure out what's going on." Fortunately, by sheer luck, and by luck I mean gather information skill, they learned that recently some local proprietors had actually come across several artifacts which were already now being sent to Darjapur, which is a city to the northeast. Now, they decide, okay, we need to go ahead and figure what's going on here. And during all this time, Rory's been out hunting. Now, he has had absolutely no success because there just isn't that much game in this area. However, he does come across a small Chittick gathering. Now, Rory actually doesn't know what a Chittick is in character, But he does successfully sneak his way in, and he sees them. And Chittics are long, almost centipedal creatures, except with really, really hard exoskeleton and massive pincers, and they're pretty deadly things, all things considered. So he decides that's not the kind of thing he wants done. So he tries to sneak his way out, and as he's sneaking his way out, he rolls a 1. Which means snap and clung, and all the Chittics come raging after him. Chunk, 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 chunk. Rory goes running, full tilt. And I'm like, well, what direction are you running in? And so he's like, oh my god, I'm running back to town, I'm running back to town. And as he's running back to town, he makes his way back onto the road, hoping to get some kind of help from anybody. And on the road, by happenstance, although this was admittedly a little bit planned, he encounters a small group of 3 dragoons, although he doesn't know what dragoons are yet either, including a gnome dragoon. And all 3 of them dispatch the very large insect-like creatures, and they talk for a bit. Rory learns from these people that these 3 dragoons are actually on their way to the air temple, which I already mentioned earlier in the southwest, and they're there because about this time, a few years ago, they successfully completed their air trial and successfully became dragoons. And so, every year they make an annual visit of it in order to retake the air trial and to try and honor and celebrate the occasion. So they're in pretty good spirits. So they go ahead and travel with Rory back to Thermata, the town. At about this point, Firnasil has woken up, right about the time Rory comes back. And Firnasil hears about the fact that the Garlands have been sent off, and she just kind of does this, and she's like, okay, we need to go get those, right now. What can we do to go get those right now? Now, the problem here is Sethos, because Sethos still has a part of his soul missing, and so it is literally going to be dangerous for him to travel at all. He'd basically have to be carried. Fortunately, the Dragoons have already come back, at this point, with Rory, and the Dragoons offered to go ahead and take Sethos with them towards the air temple in order to get him there and hopefully get him healed and whatnot, understanding the situation and the severity of it. And so the group is, thank you to the Dragoons, and runs off at full tilt in order to catch up with whoever. Now, on the road, I basically had them run several awareness rolls in order to see if they saw anyone that would actually be suspicious enough or worthy of note that might be the person carrying the Garlands. Guido, of all people, succeeded at one point. He sees a Burun stumbling along who is carrying a suspicious sack very closely and seems to be in quite a bit of a hurry. They sent a few people over, including Guido, who try to talk him out of the coins. Now, this Burun is not an idiot. He understands very quickly that they want the coins, that the coins are valuable, blah, blah, blah. Now, the Burun demands fair trade for them, or it's his hide for their loss. Now, this is interesting because what he wanted was information, okay? He wanted to know what these things were and why. Because it's funny, one of the party members is like, you want us to bribe you? And he says, no, that would be stupid. If I lost a shipment and then was found to have more gold on my person, all they'd think was that I was bribed for losing it, and then they'd take it out of my hide. No, I want information, because if I'm going to get a beating for this, I'd like something out of it. So, Guido then lies bald-faced to him and succeeds on his roll. He says that these coins are the property of Sriztiz. Now, I haven't actually mentioned him before. He is actually an infamous Sclavi pirate lord. He is the lord of the Reds. The Reds are the only organized pirates that actually exist in the setting as of this moment in time, and have for several years. I know I covered this briefly, but just to rehash you, there's a difference between a bandit or a thief or a thug or whatever and a pirate. A pirate in this setting is classified as someone who is a truly horrible person, someone who is deserving of death, someone who the nations of the world have condemned to be enemies of all sentient life, and therefore to be hunted down and killed on sight. So the fact that there's a group at all is terrifying. The fact that these belong to that group was further terrifying. So with the lie successfully told, the Burun just goes white-faced, hands over the bag, and wanders off on his own towards whatever doom awaits him. With all the Garlands successfully reclaimed, my goodness, I can't believe they even pulled that off, it took them about 6 hours to get to the air temple. Now, I'm going to go ahead and describe the air temple in brief here, and by in brief I mean in detail, if you'll forgive me. This will probably be easier to do since I can do this more visually. As they approached the air temple, they saw what looks like a massive lake over here, okay? And of course, on the outskirts of the lake is the usual Order-run city, just like there was around the Spatial Temple, just like there is around all the temples. There's a city where the people who work there and live there and do their ply their trade live. And of course, there's, merchants selling their wares and whatnot, all for extremely low prices, because that's the standard around here. So there's this cityscape in all directions here, all around this lake. Now, they keep looking around for the actual temple, but they don't see it. And after asking around a bit, they realize that, the lake itself is the temple. So they're like, okay. So they go ahead and head out towards the lake. Now, the lake itself isn't actually a lake. I just keep describing it that because until you're actually up close to it, you don't realize what you're looking at. Because it looks like it's reflecting the sky until you look down and you notice it actually is the sky. Now, the way I want to describe this is, imagine this is ground level, okay? This lake is actually this hole, this perfectly spherical hole, actually, but you can't really tell until you're up close to it, which is just a hole in the ground, except rather than leading to, a pit or a crater or whatever, it's as if this hole leads into the sky, and it's just the sky in all directions down here. Now, anyone walking over that is going to look down and see the sky and the clouds and the just yawning out infinitely beneath them, and they're going to have this sense of vertigo. In fact, several of the party members had to run back to the shore and be like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. And it took them several attempts as they're walking out on thin air, trying to make their way, closer towards the middle of this hole, which is where everyone else is heading. About halfway across this lake, or I shouldn't say halfway across because it would actually take several hours to cross a lake of that size, but my point is, as they're heading out further towards the middle, they notice that everyone else has vanished. Like, for example, if you're walking out on this hole, on this thin air, and you look around, you realize that you can still see the buildings, but there's no people. And obviously people don't go out here one by one. There's hundreds of people constantly going to the temples. So there are swarms of people going out there. And after a while you realize, without any real change or subtlety, that everyone around you is gone and you're completely alone. Now, several of the party members, again, at this point, this was just too much, and they started running back, and several other people around them started fading back into reality. But after a while, they're like, okay, it's just messing with you. Let's go out. Now, they haven't actually reached the air temple yet. What happens is when they go out far enough, they plummet at absolutely ridiculous velocities, at terminal velocity, actually. And they're going, wah, and they just plummet, screaming bloody murder. And after a while, they realize that as they are falling, there are other people falling around them. And this is, I don't know how to describe this without visualizing it. Imagine a whole group of people here that are all falling, but they're all falling at the same rate. So in relative to each other, they all appear to be at the same spot, even though what's happening is they're all constantly falling, unendingly, and they will continue to fall forever if they decided to stay here. That is the actual air temple, is a non-stop plummet through the sky. Now, in this, there is a large crystalline structure with blue highlights going through it that they realize is probably the same thing as the violet star. And so they decide, okay, that's where we'll go ahead and do our trial. Now, I don't discuss the trials on here unless the players actually want me to, and in which case, I need individual permissions and blah, blah, blah. But the point in the long story of it is I'm not actually going to talk about the trials. I do want to mention that getting up to this session took, I don't know, an hour or two, and then I started doing the trials one by one. Now, due to the nature of the air trial, it didn't surprise me that it took a while, but suffice it to say that doing all these trials did take more than a week to actually go through everyone's trial. It was actually quite a lengthy period of time. So, everyone finishes their trial, successfully or otherwise, and they in order to leave, they would just will themselves, okay, I want to leave, and all of a sudden they start falling. This is the constantly falling group. They would start falling faster relative to the position, and they would keep falling until at one point they would go flying out a hole down here, and then it would reverse, and then they'd land here, and then they'd be back on the hole, the lake hole, whatever you want to call that. And so they're like, okay, I need to get the hell out of here. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that I haven't mentioned Zeiss in a while. That's because Zeiss has been back in Holtberg pretty much this entire time. As I mentioned earlier, he refused to go with the party. He thought it was a suicide mission. Well, sometime around this time, back in Holtberg, Zeiss encountered a were-crocodile named Rikarg. Now, Rikarg was actually a servant of the Lady Airfall herself, and had been sent in order to be a liaison for the group and an aide for the group in the effort to defeat Girlin. Now, as he and Zeiss were discussing things, Zeiss received a letter from Araguna talking about what was going on and everything, and mentioning that they were at the air temple, and that's how they knew they were there. Rikarg points out that he can actually get Zeiss to the air temple very quickly and easily because he knows ways to teleport that others don't, basically, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So, after some convincing, they say, okay, fine. So Rikarg takes Zeiss to the hub in the center of Holtberg and teleports them to the air temple where they immediately, they find the rest of the party and start interacting with them. Now, as they start talking with him, they learn, they're like, can you use this teleport again? Well, not until tomorrow, because it's actually semi-limited. And it's also limited in its destinations. He can only teleport to or from locations that are directly connected to or influenced by the ley lines themselves. Hence, being able to go from a hub, spoiler alert, basically, to any of the temples. Now, this information being gathered, the two groups kind of share what's been going on and what's been happening and talk with each other for a while until finally they decide, okay, let's go ahead and get a night's rest. Nothing else is going to happen. As most of the party goes to get some night's rest, Zeiss goes ahead and decides to do the air trial while he's here. Why not, right? Interestingly enough, this trial actually shakes Zeiss up more than the spatial trial did, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So, the next morning comes by. Oh, actually, I want to share one other thing with you. At one point in time, Rikarg was Zeiss, after his trial, called Rikarg over, and he demanded to know why it is that with beings of such power, they were so interested in the party. Now, Rikarg didn't have a good answer for him, for various in-character reasons. But at one point in time, Rikarg latched onto the idea that Zeiss, maybe wanted power, and so Rikarg says, well, I could offer you power. I could make power happen for you. That's not an issue. All we need is your loyalty. And Zeiss is like, no, I don't want power. I don't want this. He's still rattled because of his trial. So he's like, I don't want anything to do with that. And Rikarg says, oh, you don't? And no, why are you offering me power? That's horrible. What is your stake in this? And Rikarg says, oh, okay. And then Rikarg erases Zeiss's memory of these events. That's all I'm going to say about that. So the next day comes by, and they wake up. And they debate their options, and they decide probably the best thing to do would be go ahead and go back to Holtberg and start establishing themselves for the next few moves. One of the things the party latches onto is the fact that Snarg, when he was using the scanner on board the Skyclaw back at Marblebush, found a huge vein of Pyrial, which they could set up a Pyrial mine at and really get some money going for themselves and for the exchange in general. So they want to get some miners, some movers, some buyers, and some sellers in order to work with that Pyrial and figure out what they can do with that. And they want to go to Janwell and figure out what happened with that ship, the captain they'd sent, and Zeiss's friend, Sareth, who was also sent there. None of whom have been heard from since. On their way, as they're leaving, Fir Nasil randomly buckled over in confusion and pain because she had received a very short and very vague telepathic message from Higaide, who, if you're paying attention, has actually been absent from the campaign for a long time. The character was NPC'd, but I kept track of what he was doing, and, he decided to come back to the campaign because he decided I was slightly less horrible of a GM than I already was. And he and I played through a few actions, and I'm not going to cover those here. Spoiler alert. She insisted that Higaide was trapped in the garden and that her brother was there. Now, this is the really screwy part, because if you've also been paying attention, Flux has been missing for a long time. Ever since the encounter at Marilasel, at this point like a month ago. So she was desperately, we need to go to the garden. We need to get there. We need to find out what's going with her brother. Oh my god, my brother's still alive. And Rikarg, who actually knew what the garden was, felt like he could get them there if they needed to. Although none of the party actually questioned why this gentleman actually knew what the garden was. They just accepted it as fact. And so he teleported them there. What they found was interesting. The garden was otherwise the same, except for two differences. One, there was this massive explosion that was just, I shouldn't say massive, it's only like 30 feet wide. There was a explosion just kind of frozen in place here. Like it had started to, you've seen something, imagine if it had gone, and it just stopped at this point. It just stayed there frozen. Now, any of the party members, with one exception, who try to interact with it, get burned horribly by it. Now, it's immediately healed because they're in the garden. But, I mean, for example, Araguna literally runs in there and runs out, and he has like third-degree burns all over his body, and his flesh is seared off, and then, it regrows, but then he's like, oh my god, terribleness. Fir Nasil just walks right into it as though it's nothing, and after a moment absorbs the energy of the explosion into herself without comment. Shrug. In the center of it, they found a very unconscious Higaide, along with several of the machines that they had left here previously. Now, they wake Higaide up and try to discuss what's been going on, and they learn from Higaide a lot about what's been happening in Vasey and Lascelles over the last month. They do find out that the Tumarok had been are actually the ones who had enslaved Visay and Lascelles. It's been hinted at a lot, but this is the first time it's finally confirmed. The Tumarok conquered Visay and Lascelles full out. No, really. They had instituted a massively brutal slave regime on all of the people of Visay and Lascelles in order to build some types of machinery. Now, Haggadah had seen some psionic stuff at this point, so he knew this stuff that they were building was even more advanced than psionic stuff. Very fanciful stuff. He didn't even know what to make of it. Now, I want to stress this because I had to re-stress this to the party a few times. The Tumarok were not just enslaving people. They were enslaving people with an aim towards efficiency. And if you know what that means no longer treating people like they're people. So they were enslaving men, women, children, elderly equally. And they would use children slaves regularly in order to, for example, get into the harder places to reach and deal with smaller machinery and that sort of thing. Pretty horrible situation, all things considered. So they realize they need to do something about this. Visay and Lascelles is completely under occupation. They ask what happened with this. Well, it turns out about 2-3 days ago. Oh shoot, I actually don't remember. Only a couple of days ago, a large group of Tumarok had left Visay and Lascelles, and in the circumstance, Flux, who apparently had a ship nearby, had decided to go ahead and try and make a raid on the island to get some prisoners out, and he managed to rescue, among other people, Haggadah, and lead him towards the Sanctum, which, even though the Tumarok were watching the Sanctum, they believed that they would be able to be safe there. Now, Haggadah insisted that they use the teleporter to get them, to get him off the Sanctum. However, when the teleporter was activated, a bunch of alarms went off, which means the Tumarok would now know that they were in the Sanctum, making it no longer safe. So Haggadah went ahead and decided to go ahead and take the teleporter to the garden, where Flux would take the rest of the prisoners and try to get back to the ship and try to escape. Now, Haggadah ended up in the garden with nothing to do and by himself, and finally ended up deciding to go ahead and try to make some of the equipment work for himself. The anti-deweaving machine, specifically, he tried to use on himself. Nothing really seemed to happen, though, so he was just like, whatever. So he decided to try and send a message out to Fear Nasil by breaking one of the pieces of machinery and using the energy it would unleash to psionically send a message out by concentrating on her very carefully. Which leads us to where we are now. Now, the group decided on on what they could do. However, well, their first option they decide is they want to go straight to the fire temple because they can go anywhere that's connected to the ley lines, right? Thanks to... Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the second thing that's changed. The teleporter leading away from the garden is gone. Now, in order for that to actually happen, whoever made it go could not just remove it. Well, I guess they could if they were Garland, but whoever did it obviously didn't just, rip it out like Garland would have. It did not have his signature weaving at all about it. So whoever done this had completely rewritten the entire garden from ground up in order to make it so that the teleporter pad was never a part of it, basically. And I don't mean never, as in this wasn't time-altering. What I mean is the new garden had no teleport in it from the get-go, so it was as if it had never been there, even though obviously it had. So they're not sure what to make of that, but it means their only way out is Recarg or the exit materia, which is random, of course. So they decide, okay, we'll go in. Recarg will send us back to the Fire Temple. Now, the reason why is because they want to take this machinery with them. Well, one of the problems is, as they're carrying the machinery, one of the players rolls a 1 and drops the machine, and it explodes in a similar manner to earlier. Massive explosion, and then it freezes in place. And it nearly kills several of the people inside it. The only reason they don't die is because they're constantly being regenerated by the garden. So Fear Nasil quickly absorbs that explosion, too, to get rid of it. And, they decide, okay, screw the machinery, we're just going to leave it here. It sucks, but whatever. Let's go ahead and get to Holtberg. So they go ahead and use Recarg's ability to translate to Holtberg, and they're like, okay, now what? Now, the moment Haggadah left the garden and ended up in Holtberg, he felt like this incredible malaise, this incredible weight just sifted over him, like he was really, really tired. Like even having the mental energy, not physical energy, the mental energy to do even normal mundane tasks was actually very taxing for him. Now, what happens next is kind of summarized, so I'm just going to skip over a bit of the details. Zeiss spent a while trying to get, people to work for them. He wanted movers, he wanted sellers, he wanted buyers, and he wanted guards. And he suggested that they go ahead and try to hire several members of the displaced refugees in order to work as miners. Snarg suggested instead that they go ahead and have several of his people, the Wildpaw and of course the Dragonflayer kobolds, in order to work as the miners instead. Well, they also found a couple of letters waiting for them, because this is actually the first time they've been back in Holtberg since, in a while. So several letters are waiting for them for there. One of the letters is to Snarg, and he finds out that the Wildpaw and the Dragonflayer have decided to accept recruitment into the... well, this is actually kind of complicated, so forgive me. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what actually happened in relativity. The Neveria Confederacy is basically ripping itself apart right now, and all of their military, which was sent north to conquer Stonehold up here, is still there. Now you may think why that's... maybe you don't understand why that's weird. Alluvia, the massive juggernaut kingdom over here, has just declared war on Neveria, and Neveria is like, oh my god, get back here, military, to defend us. The military hasn't returned. So the Neveria don't really know what to do or what they're doing, and several of the local leaders have kind of stepped up and started taking charge of things, because, the actual government of the overall Confederacy has been failing. And Toltarn, who I've actually mentioned several times before, he is the governor of Al-Jalima, has stepped up and started making a militia of volunteers for people who are willing to help defend their homes. And so the Wildpaw and the Dragonflayer have both obviously accepted doing this, even though neither of them really want to fight. They feel like this is a good fight. This is something that they could get behind, something they believe in. Now, Snarg immediately writes him a letter back saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. Don't do that, oh my god, come back, please. We've got a mining job for you, it'll be great, it's in Alluvia, blah, blah, blah. And he has sent that letter off to them presently. Another letter they found was a letter addressed to Coulson, because he was the only one who actually had an address that she could find. This letter is from Kazrinthka. Now, I hope that name has at least some significance to you, my viewer, because Kazrinthka was formerly a member of the party. She was the Ulthoi woman being played by my sister. And the news that she was alive and that she was there was a big deal to the party, because they basically had very little word of her for some time, and knowing that she was functional enough to send letters was great. There were actually 2 letters from her. Both of them were basically, what the hell's going on? They learned a couple of details from her. First of all, she is being kept under very severe watch, and her actions aren't actually being limited, but they're being culturally limited. It's hard to explain. I described it to my sister in detail, but long story short, for example, if she wants to go to the bathroom, she has to request the right to go to the bathroom. Now, that right will never be denied. She is not being limited from going to the bathroom. But the fact that she has to ask is the point that's being made. It's a cultural thing, like I said. So she is feeling very confined right now. And she has found out that there is, in fact, the Ulthoi are going to allow one person to enter Central in order to visit with her, because they will not let her leave Central. Now, that also is significant because I haven't really emphasized this before, but outsiders generally don't go to Central. They're generally not allowed in for many reasons, not the least of which being it's very uncomfortable and very inconvenient for non-Ulthoi to live within the Central hives. So allowing anybody in at all is a big deal. Coulson starts writing his return letter, and they just start debating exactly what they're going to be doing as far as going forward. And that leads us into the 25th. Which, if I'm not mistaken, is actually the most present day. Am I right? Yes, I am. Fantastic. Now, on the 25th, they have worked out a few of the more mundane details. They decided to go with a refinement company known as Saxony, props if you get the reference, in order to refine the Pyrrhal they're going to mine. They haven't really decided what they're going to do with the Pyrrhal yet, but, Vaughn is recruiting guards and personnel, and otherwise, all that's going to be done in a few days. And they've basically set into motion everything that they can do as far as getting the exchange working better. I decided at around sometime previous to now. See, okay, let me take a step back. When I had originally introduced the exchange as a fundamental part of the game, it was basically a 4X game in its own right. Sometime along the line, I realized just how much work that was and how much effort it was, and both the players and myself agreed that we should go ahead and dumb it down significantly, make it a lot simpler. So at this point, it's basically that this is this being manifested. Okay, you need to pick a refinement company, you need to pick what you're going to be doing with the materials, and you need to hire people. And all you have to do is say, this company, these kind of people I want to hire, and this is what we're going to do with it, and that's it, as opposed to actually going through more mundane matters. So, woo. Now, what happens next is actually kind of interesting. Zeiss is very worried about what's going on in Janwal because his best friend Sereth is there. So he says, we need to go to Janwal. I really want to figure out what's going on. However, none of the rest of the party is actually interested in this except for Guido, who agrees to go with him. Zeiss, who's a little bit upset about this fact, goes ahead and writes a little letter, seals it, and hands it to Firnasil and says, go ahead and open this when you're done. And in like 6 hours. And then he goes on and heads off with Guido, heading outside of the town in order to wait for the party to show up. Now, Javan, Higaide, and Snarg decide to go out shopping in order to find a few bits of willpower-enhancing gear in order to help Higaide, because his self-control is just faltering. And today, instead of feeling that horrible malaise and he's feeling incredibly energetic, like he's got a constant sugar buzz going on. It's actually really frustrating and irritating to him. And he was examined by a few people, including an actual doctor that Bonebreaker brought in. Long story short, he's pretty sure he's going to be dying in a few days. Probably related to that machine he decided to use on himself, if I were to guess on the matter. Rory, I'm sorry, I have to mention this or else Javan will be upset. They found a robe, which was actually a really awesome bargain. They rolled really well in their haggle. However, Javan insisted it be dyed purple. So, Higaide is going to have this really, really dark purple robe soon. Anyways, Rory decided to go and visit with his family. However, to his surprise, he found only his mother. Turns out that both of his siblings had decided to go ahead and accept a recruitment offer which had recently been extended to join the military, the Illuvian military. This had both Rory and his mother very concerned, because they're pretty sure this is a death sentence, and they don't like the idea of going off and doing that. But the Illuvian government is offering decent stipends to the families of deceased soldiers, and of course they pay well in their military. Rory also learns that this offer was offered to basically all of the humans in the docks district of Holtberg, so think of that what you will. Meanwhile, I don't know if I mentioned this before. I actually really genuinely don't remember. But I want to mention as well, just to make sure it is clear, one of the other things the Illuvian military has done is they have opened recruitment for an entirely new corps, which they're going to be employing entirely basically with the refugees that have been pouring in. Now, the deal is this. Those refugees will receive very little money. However, they will be given basically a stipend to their families in order to help their families have a place to live, have food, have medical treatment, that sort of thing, in exchange for the service and possibly death of the soldiers who are actually working. So a huge amount of refugees have taken them up on this option. I'm going to go ahead and let you think about that, too. Anyways, after some time passed... Oh, I'm sorry, and Coulson decided to go weaving. Insert crickets chirping here. Now, after some time had passed, Firnasil opened the letter and found out what Zeiss was attempting, because Zeiss apparently claimed that he had taken the Laysite with him. Yeah, remember that from forever ago, which they still haven't used. And he was, if they want it back, they're going to have to come and help him rescue Sarah. So the group decides, okay, fine. And they go back, and they're pretty pissed off at him, and they express that rather gruffly. But, what happens next is actually fascinating, because the timing of this is beautiful. Guido, who was with the group, hears the sounds of battle coming to his northwest, and so they decide to send Snarg and Zeiss to investigate. On their way northwest, they encounter a small group of dwarves who mistake them for the enemy. Now, Snarg runs, but Zeiss at length manages to convince them that they are not enemies, that they are actually with the exchange, to which the dwarves are like, "Aha! Gotcha! Surely you will assist us." They learn that the dwarves are actually members of the Slates. Now, if you don't remember who those are, I'll go ahead and give you a brief reminder. The Slates were the block that was actually in charge of the town of Rithholm, and the group had tried to negotiate with them some days ago, earlier in the campaign. So the dwarves are like, "Aha! You will clearly join us in our attack on Johnwall." And so Zeiss comes back to the party and shares the information, and the party debates what to do next, because they've got a lot of options here. But several of the party members agree what we probably should do is go ahead and engage in this fight, if for no other reason because showing a show of force by the exchange would probably be a good thing. and it would help us to enhance our position. The only question is, do we attack the dwarves, or do we attack whoever's in Jeanwall? And they decide to go ahead and attack Jeanwall. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of read some of my things here, because the Battle of Jeanwall was the first actual combat we've had since all the way back on Aphis Lacelle in the boss fights. And it was a significant combat. It was actually really taxing to me to keep track of, to be honest with you, because, spoiler alert, there were about 80 troops on the Janwall side, and about 36 on the dwarf side, and of course then the party, which were being tracked individually. So it took a bit of keeping track of it and keeping aware of, but... So I'm just going to read my own summary here, because I kept decent notes. The party's on the south end of town, and there's these two buildings here which have been fortified and have these windows, which several people with crossbows are looking out of, ready to attack. So they decide to go ahead and charge the eastern of these two buildings. Rory breaks down one of the walls, while Snarg leaps up to the roof of that and jams his sword down into the skull of the elf who happens to be there. That being said, Guido, seeing this opportunity, charges up and uses his ultimate attack. Oh yeah! Which then breaks. He just smashes right through the wall, and he smashes through it so hard, the roof the supports collapse and the roof kind of caves in, and the second story over here starts falling in inwards, and so there's debris and wood and dust and pebbles just flying everywhere. In short order, Higaide, Snarg, Rory, and Guido managed to either kill or managed to convince to surrender all of the remaining troops who were in that building. Firnasil, the military individual, is adamant about the fact that they try to capture as many of these people alive, not only because she believes in the general sanctity of life, having, been existing in a military where killing an enemy is just unheard of, back in Vassain Lacelle, if you'll remember, but on top of that, she genuinely wants to get as many people alive as possible. It's more useful. They could get more recruits, for all sorts of reasons. They end up with 5 prisoners in that room. Meanwhile, Firnasil and Jovan and Zeiss went to the other building. Jovan leapt up to the roof of that building. Now, here's something interesting. This is kind of a spoiler thing for you. I'm going to tell you what happened in character first and out of character second. Jovan leaps up to the roof, and he uses a spear, right? This massive spear, and he jams the spear into the roof, and it only goes in like a couple of inches, but in so doing, this massive sparking ball of lightning and electricity erupts from the spear and travels along the roof, up the wall, inside the window, along the ceiling, and then smashes into the soldiers inside, exploding into this lightning of death. It was very cool. Out of character, what happened is, after the party had completed the air trial, I asked them all to look at a series of powers that were air element related, and to pick one. No 2 players could pick the same power. However, all of them could pick exactly one air power. I also told them that those powers would manifest at a time I would decide in character, and until it did, they would be unaware of having those powers. As you might imagine, a lot of those are going to erupt during this particular combat, as indeed one of them already has. Meanwhile, inside, Firnasil did something odd. She actually hasn't used this power yet, but she went to draw on the water element powers that she already had and produced this whip, a massive whip of ice and water and rushing, frozen power in order to attack them. However, instead, it came out as air and lightning, which made no sense to her. Also, about this point, Firnasil started acting very strangely, and the air around them started to get weird. Now, just in case, I want you to understand, this is happening at about 2 in the afternoon. There's not a cloud in the sky, and there's not actually a lot of people roaming around the city because they're under attack and there's been battle horns, but there are quite a few people looking out of windows fearfully and wondering what's going on, because, there's quite a lot of people in the city who are terrified. I just want to get that across. Now, as they're doing this, the air starts to get just a little bit weird. Meanwhile, Jovan, up on the roof, has a pretty decent view of the battle, and he realizes, everything I already told you, that there's a force of dwarves over here, a force of the elves over here, and the 2 are battling. And Jovan, if you'll remember, actually was involved in the defense of Janwall way back when he was with the Free Trade League, assisting them in defense against the forces of the Viosians, whoever those are. So, Jovan is like, okay, I know that building is going to be significant of some reason. I know that one is. And so he tells all this information to Firnasil, and she's like, got it. And Firnasil and Higaide end up heading north in order to fight in the rest of the battle up there, after having subdued these troops. Now what happens next is Jovan decides to threaten the troops who had surrendered with death. That was an incredibly bad idea because, the only reason they'd surrendered is so they could live. So naturally, they immediately break out and start trying to, in desperation for their life, grab after him. And it takes the forces of Snarg, Zeiss, Joven, and I swear someone else was involved. I think Guido was. No, Guido had already left for the north. In order to subdue these guys and rebind them and be like, okay, we're not going to kill you, okay? Okay. Now, at this point in time, the party has no less than 13 prisoners in this little building, which is kind of their ramshackle headquarters at the moment. Joven stays there and decides to interrogate them briefly, without threatening them with death, and he learns that these groups, the runners, as they call themselves, are actually being commanded by someone named Radnal. Radnal of High Spring. Now, Radnal is a Lord Elf. He was a politician, he was a well-accomplished military general, and he was a dragoon. Now, several members of the party know who this character is, and so they're like, oh god, okay, gotcha, let's go ahead and... So, Zeiss and Joven are left behind in order to watch after these guys. Joven decides to do something else very clever as well. He decides to use his other use of the day for his lightning ball ability to send one of those lightning balls searing way across, because the distance is only determined by whether you could see your target or not. And he hits one of the mages who was supporting the runner's forces. Erupts into this brilliant bolt of lightning several thousand feet away. It was really cool. So, Firnasil, Rory, and Guido head north, along with Hegaide, and they all rush north in order to deal with this situation. Hegaide, Firnasil orders to go ahead and head off to that other building I mentioned earlier, the one Joven pointed out as significant. So Hegaide heads off that way. Firnasil, Rory, and Guido head to the front. Firnasil just goes in and just starts laying waste. Her lightning whip is crushing the hell out of everything, and she's just doing these whirlwind attacks, and she's smashing the ground with it, and she's screaming bloody murder. She's actually more bloodthirsty than Rory, who at this point, as a barbarian, is actually raging. And she's like, surrender! Just screaming. I don't want to actually shout it because there's other people there, but, screaming it at the top of her lungs. And so, they're not sure what to make of that. Meanwhile, Guido and Rory have managed to subdue another group, and so they've got, another 16 prisoners, which they then are ready to go. However, Rory and Guido take these 8 prisoners to go back to the bell. Firnasil takes one of them. I'm sorry, not 15, not 8. To go south. Firnasil takes one of them with her to say, I demand to be taken to your leader! And she's almost frothing at the mouth at this point. And so he says, okay, and he starts leading her east. The rest of the group takes this prisoner south, binds them with the rest of them. At this point they've got, I don't even remember, it's 20-something, 25 prisoners total here. They leave just Zeiss with these 25 prisoners. Make of that what you will. And the entire rest of the group heads north to join the battle. So, the entire rest of the group heads north, and at about this time, I should discuss what Hegaide has been doing. Hegaide made it to the building and found out that this building had quite a few people inside it. It was probably some kind of makeshift headquarters. He was pretty torn on what to do, and he decided not to attack. He decided to go ahead and just kind of be stealthy and figure out what's going on. As he was doing so, 3 armored individuals left the building, started heading west. So he was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and follow them, sneakily, stealthily. Now, those troops encounter Firnasil with Hegaide over here, and, her prisoner right there. Of course, I shouldn't even mention this, but one of the guys there is the Lord Elf, Radnal himself, Radnal of High Spring. And he looks at Firnasil, and he's like struck dumb by the sight of her. And and by the way, she's crackling with energy at this point. Lightning is just coursing all over her body. And he looks at her, and then he narrows his eyes and says, "We will never again be slaves of the Scions." Now, if you don't understand the significance of that, nobody should know that word, Scion, and nobody should be able to recognize one on sight. So Radnal immediately, Hegaide, realizing this attack, lunges forward and grabs Radnal by his neck and tries to, knock him out or whatever, or hurt him. Radnal is a dragoon, so he jumps. And then he hovers there in the air, because that's something dragoons of high level can do. It's called extended jump. So the rest of the party, rushes in. They're like, "Oh my god!" And they start fighting the two guards that are with them. The two soldiers, and they're like, "Okay, they managed to subdue them." And Guido's like, "Everyone get out! Everyone get out!" Because there's still a few civilians here or there, and he's like, "Everyone needs to clear out of this area right now!" And people start running away, screaming. And then our good friend Radnall comes slamming down with the force of a meteor right into and through Firnasil, completely impaling her into the ground and leaving a small crater there, because he did a full 3-round extended jump, which is as much as you can do, basically. It did a crap ton of damage, triple digit. Instantly killed her, of course. Put her down, I should say. And sent Hegaide flying into the wall over here. At this point in time, several of the party members are like, get him! And then he jumps up again. This is the moment at which Guido's power manifests. It's called defibrillate. The way it works is he sends out these arcing lightning over the area, and the lightning will bounce from person to person, right? It will never bounce between the same person twice. But the basic way this works is it will heal everyone nearby for an amount dependent on how many people are nearby, and it will also res people from downed up to half health into normal functionality. So it brings Firnasil back up. Oh god, at half health. Also brings the two guards they just brought down back up at half health, and completely heals everyone else nearby, because there's like I don't know, like 9 people around at this point, so that's 9d8 healing. That's quite a significant amount. So, they're all healed. Okay, yes, and the fight is commenced, and then Randall comes down again, right into Firnasil, killing her again, I might add. And at this point, she's getting a little bit screwed up. This is also when Snarg's ability manifests. His is called Analyze. Snarg can analyze someone, and I will the way this is always going to work is I'll tell Snarg, pick a number between 1 and blank. And whatever number he picks, that is the ability he's going to be able to pull from that individual and use temporarily. In this case, he gained the increased hit chance that Radnall has. So Snarg analyzes the Dragoon and realizes that ability. Rory also recognizes his ability, which is called Refined Control, which he uses in a moment. I'll get into that in just a second. So I want to stress how bad everything's been getting here, because I haven't really covered this, and I wish I had. I felt like I failed this during the session, too, for which I apologize to my players. While this battle has been going on, there's been a storm brewing. Now, again, I stressed, it's like 3 p.m., right? Bright, sunny day. Kind of cold, but we'll talk about that later. And these clouds have been slowly forming. And at this point in time, keep in mind, it's only been like a minute since Firnasil has been over here. Or rather, since the battle with the Dragoon has been joined, I should say. And these clouds just are, within a minute, this place, it's so overcast that it's basically looks like it's nighttime. What I'm talking, the dark clouds, it started to rain, there's lightning and thunder going all over the place. They managed to use the other use of Defibrillate in order to get Firnasil back up, and try to make several other attacks on Radnall, who doesn't really look like he's really being too injured by this, and they realize that this is going to be a pretty brutal battle no matter what they do. Radnall takes off again, and at this point, Firnasil screams like some inhuman beast, and just screams, "Enough! Enough!" And this column of horrifying lightning rips out of her into the sky, and connects with the storm above, like a very, very tightly focused tornado. At this point, it begins to hail, and the air itself begins charged with electricity, and the thickness of the storm has actually gotten much, much, much worse, because visibility at this point is literally, I'd say about this far. As far as clear visibility, you could maybe see about 20 feet if you try, but that's about it. It is completely swarmed with storm and lightning and hail and rain. At this point, we're at tornado level winds, which is literally starting to rip the nearby buildings apart, sending people flying through the air. There are screams in all direction. Everything is just going completely nuts. This is the moment at which Rory discovers his power, Refined Control. He manages to avoid the lightning bolt, the lightning column I just mentioned. The party, at this point, were expecting Radnall to continue his attacks, but he actually vanished for some reason. They're not actually sure what happened to him. Now, the party, in the midst of this storm, probably has some idea of just how bad things are. However, to really emphasize this, I went ahead and role-played for Coulson for a bit. Now, Coulson, who was weaving, was approached by Ricard, our were-crocodile friend, and he says, I'm a bit of a weaver, I could help you with that. And when I say a bit of a weaver, this guy is so good at weaving, and a project which would have taken Coulson 7 hours, he completes in a second, and I am not kidding about that. Now, to be nice, and also because it made sense to me, Ricard then offers to complete all of the weaving work Coulson wanted to do with him, and so he does it right in front of him, and Coulson sees literally a master and an artisan weaver in action, and as a result he gains a permanent +1 bonus to his weaving simply because he sees the patterns and the way he does it, and he understands it better. So that works out really cool for him. And with all that done, Coulson decides to go ahead and hang out with his niece for a while. Now, while they're hanging out, they notice the weather is getting kind of weird. Now, for those of you who are not aware, Holtberg is about 70 miles away from Janwall, to give you a bit of an idea. But the weather's getting weird even out here. And so he goes ahead and leaves his niece there at the Tap Caf where they're hanging out and just, chatting, enjoying some food. And he gets in a cab and says, "Drive me to the north. I want to see what's going on." Because you can tell that something's happening to the north. And the cab driver drives him, gets all the way up to the north end. Now, he can't actually exit the gates. And you may be asking, why does he have to get to the edge of town? Because there's these massive walls, I've mentioned these before, surrounding all the major cities. So he would have to actually get to the gate in order to be able to see through and see what's going on. And he can't actually exit because there's still thousands upon thousands of refugees trying to stream in. However, even at the gate, he can actually see that storm from there. 70 miles away, he can see that storm. If you understand anything about the curvature of the Earth and light pollution, you understand how significant that is. It also is having a very deleterious effect on Coulson's mind, and on the mind of everyone in the area who can actually use magic at all. Not that they're aware of that just yet. Meanwhile, back at Janwall, this is full-on psychotic hurricane levels of terrible. The party members are struggling just to be able to walk at this point, being so close to the epicenter. And it's not like the eye of a storm. There's nothing peaceful here at all. There's still that column of lightning still erupting from Firnasil into the sky. And the intensity of the energy was actually growing at this point, and the party could literally not even hear each other or even see each other at this point. Now Higaide, who isn't sure what to make of any of this and is struggling to get away, realizes all of a sudden that a lot of the air and a lot of the lightning was actually gathering around him, like circling him and enshrouding him, and he realizes in a moment that he is probably about to die because of whatever was changed within him after that experiment he did back on the garden. And based on everything he learned, this is probably it for him. And so Higaide, realizing he was facing his final moments, refuses to give up hope. He is struggling to survive, no matter how hopeless it may be, and no matter how laughably far-fetched, he decides to go ahead and spend all of his final energy punching his hand into the ground in the hopes that will ground him and somehow save him from this death storm of unholy doom which is touring around them. And in the final moments there, Snarg decides, as a desperate measure, to go ahead and use his Analyze ability one last time on Firnasil, even though he can't actually see her amidst the torrent and amidst the storm and amidst the lightning thing. And he sees something unusual. And this is where we're going to go ahead and stop the video. Now, if you think that's cruel, I'd just like to say that you are now officially caught up. That was actually the most recent session. I have finally caught up with the D&D blogs, and next Monday, prior to my surgery, is actually when I will be going ahead and continuing the session from this exact stopping point. So I actually did cut off the session right there at this moment of absolute pitch. So hopefully you've enjoyed, and hopefully you're as anxious as I am to see how things are going to end up. Either way, I'll see you next time.